I'm excited about this one. Today, I am actually talking to Ken Case, who is the founder and CEO of Omni Group, the makers of some of my favorite productivity software, tools that I have been using for quite a long time on my Mac, on my iPad. We're going to be talking about productivity techniques and tools and ideas and philosophies, the usual kind of topics that I nerd out over. Today, with a guest. Ken, it's awesome to have you.
Well, thank you for inviting me. It's fun to be here.
You have been working on Omni Group for a long time, longer than most of the productivity tools that people are using today. Is that fair to say?
That is fair to say, longer than some of our employees have been alive. So
You started on Omni Group. What year was that?
we started the year that I can look at as the founding date would be 1992, which is the year that we registered omnigroup.com. We had been working together as consultants before that, but we were working on various projects, sometimes together, sometimes not, and we were always getting like paid by somebody else directly. And 92 is when we decided, all right, maybe we should make this common and start forward in that way.
It feels like almost the classic pipeline from the original days of productivity tools. It was folks who were building products, building things for other people, getting paid as consultants, getting paid as developers who took the leap to create their own products. And that's something that I think we see a little bit less of now. Do you think that kind of shaped what you were doing at Omni Group?
Yeah, I started seeing the shift in the 80s, really, I guess, between one set of philosophies where people were just using computers for fun and for productivity and because of their passion for it, whatever they were doing, to, oh, maybe people can make money out of this. Let's start building a business around it. And so we got a lot more business majors starting to take computer classes in the 80s than just computer folks who were these odd geeks off in the corner doing this stuff. But yeah, I think by trying to ground yourself in what people are actually trying to do and solve their problems, their specific problems. So we started out as a consulting company and we were building custom solutions for different businesses. You really have to listen to what are people trying to do and then think about how can you make that better for them.
So you've been building for Apple platforms since the Next days, is that right?
Yes, if you can count the next days as being part of the Apple platform.
I think we can now.
Right.
In hindsight, I
It,
think we
it worked
can.
out that way for sure. Yeah.
So what is the underlying belief about platform-specific software that keeps you loyal to that path?
Well, when I first encountered the Next platform, I was at that time trying to develop software for as broad a range of Unix platforms as possible because that felt to me like the best way to get the most value for the effort that I was putting in. If I'm spending weeks writing some code or months writing some code, it'd be nice as many people as possible could use that code and do something useful with it. And so I was trying to at that time. There were probably at least 15 different Unix variants that I was building stuff for. And then I discovered the Next platform, which had a very different way of working with AppKit and Objective-C. And I realized that I could build much more polished products with a lot less code. Let's put it that way. And so that made me more productive. It gave me a much more productive result. But of course, the end result was then you were stuck to this tiny audience of the Next platform, which was not very big at that time. And was that so? I thought long and hard about that trade off and decided I really wanted to be producing the best product I could, even if maybe the audience ended up being smaller. And that the productivity gains that I was getting maybe made that worth it enough to do. And so then what I would do is focus on what can I do to help that platform grow and succeed so that the audience gets bigger and that work that I'm doing is even more valuable to more people. And so that
And then,
was
of
our goal
course,
through
when
this. Okay,
Next,
how can we help
yeah,
Next succeed? Let's build a web browser. Let's build image viewers. Let's whatever we needed to do.
mm, the web browser being OmniWeb, which is still updated today.
It's true. Yeah, it's the one I still use.
I use it regularly. It's either Safari or OmniWeb, and occasionally if I have to have some kind of Chromium product, it's Brave, but Safari and OmniWeb pretty much keep me going.
Oh, good.
So once Next folded back into Apple, and I guess it took on a new life, a different life, and Apple had a bit of an injection of energy. How did that change things?
Yeah, we had just about despaired that Next was not going to make it, that we were going to have to give up on this effort that we were doing to try to help Next succeed because they were turning into kind of a Windows tool vendor with web objects for Windows and the environment there and
Mm.
just doing back end stuff. And although we did do some web objects consulting and help build some of those early websites, that really wasn't where our passion was as much as building productivity software for the desktop for customers to use directly on their own computers. And so we started looking at what the other options were that were out there. We started consulting for Sun and helping them maybe build Java into this same sort of thing. At that time, they were thinking maybe
Mm.
Java would be the desktop. And then we heard what the last 2 weeks of '96 that the Apple was buying Next. And oh, how soon can we get out of this Java work that we're doing and start going back to the Objective C and apt-get and the environment that we loved.
When you were building productivity software at the time, what were the actual tools that you were selling?
Alongside our web browser, at that time, what we were doing, we were still mostly consulting. So we were working on other people's projects, even when they were desktop productivity apps. And the big vendor on the Next platform at that time was Lighthouse Design. Lighthouse Design ended up getting purchased by Sun because Sun did want to turn Java into this desktop environment. And so they were taking their suite of productivity apps, which were things like Concurrence, which was the tool that Steve Jobs was using to do his presentations back then. So if you imagine an version 0.1 of Keynote, you could think of Concurrence as being that. And then a diagramming app that they were working on called Diagram, which is very much omnigraphal. And those were the two that we mostly helped out. We also helped out on some project management software that they did.
So Apple purchased Next, and then you were still building some of these services, still working on a few of these different products. There was a bit of a leap that you eventually made to start launching the Omni products that we know today.
Yeah, so of course we had built OmniWeb back in '94. And we had actually sold it through Lighthouse Design. They marketed it for us, and we didn't have any salespeople. We were just programmers. We didn't know anything about any of that world. And so they printed the boxes and everything else, did the marketing. I even wrote the documentation, I think. But
Software boxes.
yes, I
Good
still
times.
have the box
Yeah.
up here on my shelf.
Mm.
Not maybe that version, but I'll probably do have that version somewhere. But yeah.
I'm one of those people who collects old software boxes from like the Wolfenstein 3D software box I have somewhere in my office, all those different things. So I love them. They're like vinyl records, but for software people.
Yeah, no, there's a lot of nostalgia wrapped up in those boxes, which is why I do have these shelves of them right here. Both of our software and other people's software that I used over the years. But yeah, so we of course had OmniWeb. We had a few free tools that we were putting out there at the time, like OmniDisk Sweeper, that's still around. And then image viewing, a CD player, I don't know, just whatever we felt things were whatever the platform was missing that we can do, and what can we do to help make things better. The other thing that we were doing at the time was more consumer focused rather than just the consulting business side of things. We were helping out with game ports. And as you may know, John Carmack was developing on the Next platform, even though
Yeah.
he was building that software cross-platform to run on DOS and then Windows and so on. And we ended up helping him make Doom run better on NextStep and OpenStep.
Mm.
And then he contacted us when he needed like a 3D driver for this rendition graphics card, the prototype hardware that he was getting, because people were starting to realize maybe hardware acceleration would be a useful thing for 3D graphics and games. And so
Maybe.
so we built that, and then started just helping out with porting Quake over. And so as Apple bought Next, then we started porting Quake. We brought Quake to the Apple platform, to the Mac platform, and then we started helping other companies. That a lot of people were building games around that Quake engine back then. They didn't want to build a whole new 3D environment from scratch, and we didn't have all of the nice 3D libraries that are available now for developers. So they were taking a game that had already been built, and then they were tweaking it around and customizing it with their own content. And we were helping out with games like No One Lives Forever and a whole bunch of different games that came out around that time. And that kind of got us into the games market, at which point we started doing games for other engines like Oni and Giants and Citizen Kabuto and whatever else. Some fun times.
You established yourselves as the people bridging the gap between what Next had been and what Mac could be.
And trying to help make sure the Mac was going to go somewhere, right? There were real concerns in '97 about, is this platform really going to succeed and exist?
In the 90s, it felt like it was dying. Right. It felt like Apple was not going to make it, almost.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. We saw these magazine covers that say "Prey" on, right, with the crown of thorns. Yeah.
At what point did you realize that actually this is starting to get traction? When did Apple start to really make sense?
For us, coming from the tiny Next platform, even going from the volume we were doing there on the Next platform to now this larger Mac platform, Mac was selling as many I think when in 97, as that merge happened right at the beginning of 97, I think Apple was selling about as many Macintoshes every month as Next had sold of their operating system during the entire lifetime of Next. And so it was already operating on a very different scale from our point. And so there was some success there, but it's still the trajectory was going in the wrong direction. The sales were going down. When Steve came in and simplified the product line, said, okay, let's build an iMac, let's build a Power Mac, and let's just have one thing in each of these four quadrants. We drastically simplified the product line. That was when it started to feel like there was a better direction there. And certainly when the iMac started doing well, helping people get online. And then when Mac OS 10 finally shipped and the next technology really was now the basis of the new Mac platform, that was for us when it felt like that was a great turning point.
What was the point where you started to launch the productivity tools that have really put your flag in the ground?
Sure. As Mac OS went into beta, we, of course, had our web browser ready, and that was pretty exciting. That was well received because at that time, most web browsers did not have great looking graph fonts and so on, and the typography. And that was something that we did have in OmniFocus, not in OmniFocus, in OmniWeb. And at the same time, we were working on OmniGraffle and building our diagramming software. We had already started working on Omni Outliner a bit as well. And so we had all of those three products ready by the time Mac OS 10 shipped. It still wasn't enough business. Not enough of the Mac community was ready to switch over to this completely new operating system, and some of their old apps didn't work yet or whatever for us to fully transition away from consulting right at that moment. But we started the transition at that point. Okay, we still want to do some more games because we do think that helps the platform, but maybe that's not going to be what we want to do forever. Let's focus on some of our own stuff. How can we keep building OmniGraffle, Omni Outline, and make them better? And so we had several fast turns, like from Omni Outliner 1 to 2 to 3. Those were happening much more rapidly than we have done in more recent years, where we've taken a bit more time. But part of that also is just that the apps are more mature now. So there's a lot, they've gotten a lot more capable. There's a lot more to touch.
What was it about the productivity space that made you passionate about building in it?
Just like I felt it was useful me to adopt better tools as a developer, and that was what made me adopt the next platform. I felt like if we could do something similar for customers who are trying to get work done using their computers, then that would be a good thing for the world, right? If everyone can just be more productive. I don't know if it's an idealistic sort of approach to things, but that's just what led us
Are
down.
we not idealists,
Right.
though? I think there's value in being idealistic, in having something that you hold up as a higher value. And I know you've talked before about craftsmanship as a value. How do you protect that craft ethos in a software and business world that rewards speed and iteration and hype a lot more than polish?
I guess we just we tune out that part of the world for the most part. I mean,
Yeah.
to some extent you can't because there's a lot of money going in those directions, and we see advertising happening for a lot of things that can dominate the conversation. But because our motivation isn't directly about money, obviously we need money to succeed. So we can't ignore money in the question
Harsh
altogether,
reality, yeah.
or we wouldn't be able to keep doing what we're doing. But but it needs to come secondary from our point of view, at least for
Yeah.
us, to building great software in the first place. And so if we can build great software and make enough money to keep doing it, then, and if we can, in that process, then help our customers feel more productive and hopefully have them enjoy using our software, not just be more productive, but have it be software that they just enjoy sitting down with and using, then we feel like we're on the right track.
From my perspective, you are definitely on the right track. I still sit down and use the Omni products and feel a sort of lightness that I don't feel with other tools. I use Omni Outliner for most of my writing. I use OmniGraffle for all the social graphics and YouTube thumbnails, all that kind of stuff. I use OmniFocus daily to manage my business, my writing, but also being a parent. I have a 9-year-old. All of that just happens in these tools. And there is still a lightness and a joy to them that I find unmatched by a lot of the newer tools.
Oh, thank you very much. That is really nice to hear. And that's part of what motivates us is hearing things like that.
A huge number of productivity tools today are essentially web apps in desktop wrappers, whereas Omni, by contrast, continues to build truly native applications. What advantages do you believe native apps still confer in 2025? And do you think the industry is missing anything by drifting more and more towards just browser-based experiences?
Yeah, this is an interesting sort of progression that we've seen this go back and forth many times over the decades. Like,
Mm,
I think of web apps as being the modern incarnation of mainframe apps, right? Where it's running on
mm,
somebody else's computer that is
mm,
hosted by them somewhere you don't necessarily know where, and then you connect to it from your local system, and you go and talk to that, and you have a terminal that's a window into that and connect to it. But really, you're dependent on them continuing to keep that system running. They're hosting all of your data. There are a lot of interesting things about that world. I used to be, as I alluded to earlier, I was a Unix systems programmer and would write software for these mainframe systems. And it's fun that you then have multiple users that are actively using the same computer at the same time. And so you can do some interesting
mm.
interactions with them that way. We could build some great multiplayer games when we were doing it back then on those mainframes. But whereas at things the other direction, you then had the PC revolution where people were starting to move more of this power to their own desktops and have a completely independent computer that was under their own control. The network wasn't fast enough for them to do very interesting things yet on it. So most of the stuff that they did was just on their local machine. The systems were more capable and powerful, but then they were responsible for keeping track of their own backups and so on and so forth. So I view the current world is colored by my 80s perspective that this is really the same sort of thing happening again. But it's different, or it's interesting because of course our computers, our local systems are now powerful to run this stuff, right? Like I can run OmniFocus on my watch, but
Mm.
the network is now fast enough that it's much easier to reach the server. So there's a lot more parity about what you could accomplish in either place, and so you have some choices about it. And I think that's why we do have so many things that are happening in both places. For me personally, to get back then to your question, just what is it that the native apps do better? It is that it gives you that control, that independence, that you don't have to worry about what happens. How many of the services that you talk to right now can you be certain you will have access to in 10 years? It's really hard to guarantee that any of those are services that you can't access. Whereas anything that's running on your local device, if it can run on that device when it's unplugged from the internet, it'll be able to run on that device when it's unplugged from the internet in 10 years, right? There's nothing that you lose control over that way. But beyond that level of control and privacy, because if the data is up in somebody else's computer, they have access to it. We saw that back in the mainframe era as well, where the system operators had access to everything. Beyond the control issue, there are also just a lot of details that you can do when you take advantage of your local processor in a way that's not just providing a terminal to the internet. A terminal to the internet is by design least common denominator. So you're not taking advantage of your local hardware's capabilities nearly the same way as a native app might be able to do. You're not necessarily going to have good time machine integration. You're not going to have Spotlight integration. You're not all sorts of things that
Mm.
happen on your local device just don't happen in the cloud. But at the same time, there are lots of things that happen in the cloud that don't happen in your local device. So it's a trade-off for sure.
So obviously, OmniFocus does have a web app, a web version, which is probably the closest anything at Omni Group gets to cross-platform. How are you thinking about those trade-offs when you're building OmniFocus for the web versus for the native device?
So obviously, our primary focus is on OmniWeb as the native app, and
Mm,
that's where
mm,
the features come first. That's where all the design work happens first, and so on. But
mm,
we build OmniFocus for the web because we know people live in a world where they don't always have control over what device they're using, and so maybe they're using a Windows box and they aren't able to run OmniFocus on it, like when they're at work or whatever. And so we wanted to make sure that it was a tool that was available to them wherever they were. It doesn't mean that the experience is as good, and we would love for it to be as good. But on the other hand, to make it as good, we would have to spend, I think, more effort than we spend trying to make it as good as it is on the Mac and the iPad and the iPhone and the Apple Vision Pro and of course the watch. And that doesn't. We could become web developers, and we have been in the past, but that's not really where our passion is, as you can tell.
I suppose the trade-off there isn't quite worth it, is it?
My inclination would be if we wanted to do something, I would still want to take advantage of your local devices more than just building something that runs in. we wrote a web browser, so we're pretty familiar with what the limitations are for the web. I'm talking back and
Yeah.
forth across it. We would rather write something that maybe is a cross-platform Linux app or something, right? That
Mm.
talks and that you can run on that hardware yourself, because then we don't sacrifice the control over where your data lives. We take advantage of more of your local hardware capabilities, all of those kinds of things. I think that would be philosophically closer to where our heads are at than becoming web developers. But again, part of the reason we decided to focus was because it would take us further if we could put our attention in one place.
Jumping around a little bit, I think we are in the middle of what some people are calling a new browser war because we have all these AI browsers. We have the what is it, the ChatGPT browser, we have the Perplexity browser, we have the Dia browser, all these different tools that put AI in your browser, and people are trying to fight for that kind of share again in a way they haven't really in quite some time. Do you see OmniWeb making a comeback, making a great big splashy return at any point? Bearing in mind, I'll be excited if the answer is yes.
I don't know that the answer is yes necessarily. It's an app that I plan to stop working on, but it's an app that has been relegated to my spare time now for what, the last 15 years or so.
Yeah.
The I certainly have been following that with interest and thinking about that space and what people use that for and whether that would make sense in any of my workflow or not. And since at this point I'm not trying to sell on web, I'm just trying to use it. I guess a lot of the what goes into it is focused on what is it that I need at the moment. That's not to say that I wouldn't enjoy hearing from other people and what they need, but sadly I don't have a lot of time to invest in it directly. But maybe that would change.
I think, yeah, I think I like having a browser that isn't being overtaken by AI features. I think that is one of the things that I really appreciate about using OmniWeb is I don't feel like there are chatbots about to be forced into my sidebar, and I enjoy that.
Right.
It's not that I'm anti-AI, I like for things to be in boxes. I like to be able to be using my web browser, and then if I want to use a chatbot, I can go and open that app and use that as well. But I don't see a need to have them all smooshed into one thing.
Yeah, if you think about how we've been integrating the Apple Foundation models into OmniFocus and now into
Mm,
Outliner 6 and so on, you can imagine how we might do something for OmniWeb as well, right? Where we would make it part of our plugin system that lets you make those choices as the user of how you want things to integrate and how much control you might want to have. Or if you're a plugin
mm.
developer, then you could build something then on top of the whole platform, I guess, the app as a platform.
Yeah.
But we don't have an agenda where we're trying to push something on people.
The work with the Apple Foundation models has been very cool to play with. So I have been using it in OmniFocus. I've been using Plan for Me, and I've been using the plugin to estimate how long the task is going to take, and that's been quite useful. So I think there's a nice sort of mindful approach to AI there that is already paying off. I haven't used the on the Outliner 6 AI plugins yet, but I'd be keen to hear how you are thinking about which of these tools to build and how you're going to tap into the Apple foundational models. What are you thinking about in terms of what to build first?
Sure. So obviously, our first step is just to make that capability available to people and not, again, propose a specific solution. Although we built some example plugins like that Plan for Me plugin and Estimate and so on,
Mm,
just to help people have something that they could use right off the bat without
mm.
having to write their own code for it. Because obviously, that's not a great experience for people either if they see that this thing is there, but they don't know how to use it, and they maybe just get frustrated.
It's
But
just out of
yeah.
reach. Yeah.
So hearing what people might be interested or might want to do with something is, of course, one way for us to guide what we would work on next. The other day, I was playing with how we might integrate into OmniGraffle, and I wasn't talking with Apple's foundation models. In this case, I was using the Quen 3 coder model, but where I was running it locally on my Mac, and I could then just say things like, I noticed that somebody had done like a Swift UI architecture diagram where they had a little class and they said, could you diagram this for me? And it did a little text-based diagram. I'm like, oh, that's interesting. If it can do that kind of text diagram, it ought to be able to do it in OmniGraffle, right? So I reproduced the same questions on my session. And then I said, okay, so in OmniGraffle, I can build that same diagram and then use copy as JavaScript and this is the JavaScript it gives me. Now, could you change that diagram and spit out the JavaScript that would make this thing? And it did.
Mm.
Fun to play around with it. You put things in maybe surprising places. There are lots of different ways to think about how you diagram something, but it's interesting to play around with. I don't know whether that necessarily is the right thing that people are going to want around this stuff. But it was also interesting that I could take a diagram of a class diagram that I had built up and say, paste the JavaScript into the chat session and ask it, what is this diagram about? And it could actually come up with something interesting.
You've used the word play a few times here, and I think that's interesting. It's that you still think about building technology as a form of play, as something to enjoy and to explore without necessarily having a clear end goal.
I sure hope it is for me. I hope it is for other people too.
Mm.
I know a lot of people, it's not for everybody, of course, but where it can be that I love what I do and I want other people to enjoy what they're doing.
So I'm going to drill a bit more into the AI sort of stuff here. It's not my favorite topic, it's not my least favorite topic, but it is something interesting to talk about, and I think I'd value your perspective on this. Obviously, vibe coding has been a thing. Vibe coding has taken over everyone's discourse about development and software and so on. How are you thinking about using AI as a developer?
Oh, sure. Not as a vibe coder for sure, where I define
That's not your
vibe
thing.
coding as describing the outcomes that you want and not caring about the implementation. I do care about the implementation pretty deeply as it happens, and for me, that's part of the fun. So why would I want to take the fun away out of my coding process? There are, of course, some things I think that guys can that the large language models that we currently use can that help people save time on, right? Whether it's maybe doing some repetitive tasks or doing LLMs are pretty good at translating. So you can go maybe from one programming language to another or and so on. But I really don't trust their work every time I play around with it. So it saves some time, some maybe rote work, but then it adds some time in terms of like supervision time and where that balance is a good question. But certainly I'd want to be super careful with what kind of results I was getting out of it. And that's, of course, setting aside any of the questions around how are these things being trained, ethical to train them that way, to use them that way. At least when I'm running them, I only run local models that are on my own hardware, so I know where the power is coming from and how much power it's using and that kind of thing.
You're not about to just turn all of Omni Group onto Cursor tomorrow and start using whatever those new tools
No,
are.
if somebody else has that idea and they want to say, could you ask Cursor to build Omni Group's apps, that I would be interested in seeing what result they get out of it. But,
I'd try that just out of
yeah.
curiosity. I am bloody minded. That's an interesting question. How protective do you feel about the way that Omni Group has built things? OmniFocus has a very specific point of view for how to work and how to get things done. If people started copying those features, those ideas into cross-platform apps, how would you feel about that?
People have and do and they have. I guess I'm of too. I don't know how much. I haven't really mentioned that as we were coming over to the Mac platform and we wanted to make sure everything succeeded, we also started publishing a bunch of our source code for people so that they could learn from it and build things that maybe weren't what we were building, but would help the platform as a whole because this is all stuff that moves things forward. So I guess moving things forward is my goal, and it's not necessarily that people have to be buying our software for it to be moving forward. If other people are taking our ideas and then building other great ideas beyond that, then I guess we've succeeded in a sense, right? That we got to move things our step forward, and then somebody else picked up the ball and moved it further again. That every time I see an OmniWeb feature in another browser, that's how I try to,
The vertical
yeah,
tabs.
feel about that.
Yeah. Every time
Blocking,
I see a new app come out and they announce vertical tabs, I'm like, I remember vertical tabs. That's what I use in my current browser, OmniWeb. Yeah,
right.
it's interesting. Yeah.
Yeah, it's a little disappointing to me if they never give credit or if people never
They
recognize
rarely
that.
do.
But,
Yeah.
um, but, but it's more important for me to just see things keep moving forward because I do live in this world where I want things to be moving forward and not backward.
I'd love to hear about how you personally organize your work, how you use OmniFocus and OmniOutliner, and how you approach your day at Omni Group using the tools that you have.
Sure. So I have both apps running all the time. I have a lot more Omni Outliner windows open at any one time than OmniFocus windows. Focus might often be hidden, in fact, because it's not. I should note that a lot of the tasks that I do for work, we will track in our bug tracking system, which is something that we built back in before
Yeah.
we registered OmniGroup.com. So like in '91, right? The OmniBug Snackers.
I've read about
Yeah,
this. It's a purely internal tool, no plans to make it an external tool. Yeah.
right. So that's where my work lives that has to do with tracking what's going into the next version of Omni Outliner, for example, right? Like here's a list of things, and here they have milestones associated with them, they have priorities and who's assigned to it, what the current status is, all of that kind of stuff. So none of that work is in OmniFocus, right? OmniFocus is to help keep track of the stuff that is not being tracked by that for me. So all the, and sometimes maybe to capture things that aren't yet in Bug Zapper that do need to get there eventually. So I have a tag for OmniBug Zapper, and sometimes I'll just say, "Oh, remind me to do this," and then I'll see that thing was in my OmniFocus database, and I'll go file a real bug for it that then other people can see. So OmniFocus through the day, I'm not living in it as a place to act on plans so much during my workday anyway. It's a place where I will review things for sure, occasionally to see what might need to move back and forth from one place to another. And it's a place where I'll capture things for doing stuff later so that I can basically move on with my life and not be distracted by something like and worrying that is there something that I forgot that I need to get done. Whereas Omni Outliner is a place where every time if I'm working on a blog post, I might outline it in the Omni Outliner. If I'm taking notes in a meeting, I'll take those notes in Omni Outliner. Or writing up, maybe it used to be when I was doing meetings in person, I would usually write that with pen and paper, and then later I would go back and write up those notes in Omni Outliner. And that process of outlining the notes that I had just taken was often a way to help clarify the ideas for me and made it more useful. Even if I maybe I'd never looked at that outline again, a chance to do the rewrite really helped me process it and make it more useful to me. And then a lot of outlines are around things like, okay, what are the product features that we're trying to emphasize for this next version of an app or for this release or whatever. I don't know. Does that answer your question? A lot of use of both.
What non-Omni tools do you use? Are there any non-Omni tools that you love?
Of course, I'm used like Apple's built-in tools. I use Mail. I use Messages. I don't use that. I use Messages mostly for personal communication. For work, we use Mattermost. We use Discourse for forums for communicating with customers in the long-term way where you actually have history that lasts a while. Other tools that I use on my desktop, maybe I should glance over here. Oh, of course, the screen decided this is an OLED screen that to off and then not turn on for a while it makes sure all of its pixels
Of
are
course,
okay.
of course, yeah.
But I'll cancel its little thing there. Yeah, just looking across the bottom of my dot. Of course, we also chat with customers on Slack. So you'll notice there are a bunch of kind of these web tools that I've been talking about that are the non-Omni tools and non-Apple tools. Some of the native third-party tools that I'll use are all little things like Source for thinking about which SF symbol am I going to use for as I'm designing something. And there are a lot of, I guess, little things like that. But I spend a lot of my time either in Omni tools or in Xcode or in Terminal. And
That's mostly
yeah, Terminal's a big part of my life for sure. A lot of open terminal windows too.
it. Can't get away from
Yeah.
it. So before we wrap up, Omni Outliner 6 went out for testing yesterday. I started using it. I'm already falling in love with it, but I would love to hear some thoughts about how you got to Omni Outliner 6 and what questions you were trying to solve or what were you trying to do different with this release?
Sure. So the first thing that was on our minds as we were designing Omni Outliner 6 is that we wanted it to be a universal app. That was the premise coming from. And that's an initiative. When I say universal, obviously I'm talking about Apple platforms. We had started out with this being a Mac app at the start of macOS 10. We had brought it to the iPad when the iPad came out, and we had our iPad or Bust initiative back in 2010.
Mm.
And then we were in this world where we were going back and forth from, okay, now we'll do a Mac release. Oh, now we'll do an iPad release. Oh, wait, now the iPad and iPhone are getting to be a little more universal themselves. I guess there's a combined release for the iPhone and iPad, and then back to the Mac, and so on. And we wanted to get away from that back and forth development process and instead do a unified development process, much like we've already done for Omni Plan and Omni, is where we release a new version for all of the platforms at the same time, which has its own challenges, of course. But it's easier now than it was 15 years ago because instead of having completely different UI frameworks that we're working with, the AppKit or the UI kit, we now have Swift UI where we can write shared code that runs on both at the same time. And not all of our code has been moved to Swift UI or anything. There's still places where AppKit is more useful or UI kit is more useful. But but there's a lot of common code now that can be shared. So we wanted to the feature set to a place where it had a lot more parity across all of the platforms. That was the first thing that we had in mind, and where you buy the app once and you use it across all your devices. And that's just how we think people work these days. And they're used to working it that way. But then if you have all of your data across all the devices, what does that mean for not just the capabilities of the app, but how you treat your data, how you have data linked to itself, and so on. And so we realized we had a problem there to solve, and that was where Omni links came into the picture, where we had early versions of Omni Outliner had already had support for links to other documents, and that isn't itself a new feature, but those links were based off of like file aliases and other sort of Mac specific technology that never made the transition over to iOS, and which was originally a file-less system. It didn't have the Files app even for browsing things, where every app had to build its own file browser. And so all of that technology had to be rethought about how do you make this portable from one system to another. Back when we wrote the linking for the Mac, there really wasn't as much expectation that you'd be using multiple systems throughout the day. Like you might have one Mac and that was the one you used, and so it was already a little bit broken if you went to share a document with somebody else, and now their username was different, and so the paths were different, and so as the world started syncing and then using completely different platforms, all of that ability to reference content from another outline got lost, and so we wanted to get that back into place, and that's really where the problem that we set out to solve with OmniLinks. And so that's a big part of the Omni Outliner push. Another big interesting thing that happened was just this last summer, of course, Apple introduced Liquid Glass, which is the first time they've done a design system across all of their platforms at once, instead of they had done, for example, Aqua for Mac OS X, which is redesigned from Platinum before that. And later they did iOS 7, which is a very different look than the previous versions of iOS. But none of those were things that happened across the iPhone and the Mac and the iPad all at the same time. And having a design system that's designed to be consistent, even if it's not perfect, and I'm not saying that it's flawless what they've done here, but
I
it's
like it. I'm weird.
yeah,
I enjoy it.
but it is a big improvement, I think. And having buttons that actually look like buttons on every platform, things like that, right? And having the consistency so that now it's easier for us to document or to take screenshots and have it look the same across relatively the same. There's just a lot of value there, even if there are certain details that people are still squabbling over, shall we say, and that Apple is
Yeah.
still improving with every beta. Release. So we wanted to, of course, take advantage of Liquid Glass. That's also an important part of doing a universal app now that is working across everywhere. And then we set out specifically to what are some of the features that we're missing on iPad. Okay, full control over styles. Like when we originally did the iPad app, we were trying to make sure all of the semantic content came over, but UIKit didn't even support rich text very well yet at that time. And so we had to build our own RTF reader and so on. Maybe that was done by the time Outliner shipped. It wasn't when we did OmniFocus for sure. And so we didn't even try to match the appearance of the documents very much back then. But it became clear over time that was what we actually wanted, was to have full control parity. So the ability now to inspect styles and see what's contributing something, have full hierarchical styles and name styles and all of that, exactly the same on the iPad, and have controls like vertical line or indent controls and so on, was another big piece of what we were working on for Omni Outliner 6. And then multi-window support on the Mac was another big feature that we and when I say multi-window support, we've always had multiple windows where each window was its own document, but we wanted the ability to open multiple windows on the same document. And maybe you're working on a really long outline. I know when I helped my mother with her doctoral dissertation, it was all in Word at the time, and we pulled it into Omni Outliner so that we could kind of restructure things, and in a much easier way than trying to move these paragraphs around in Word. And then once we got it the way we wanted, we exported it back out to Word, and she went on and published a dissertation. But in that process, we were now working with a very long outline, and it would have been great to be able to see the top at the same time as you're looking at the bottom, or have one view where all of the elements are collapsed and the others are open, and so on.
And see that, yeah.
So that's another big feature that we now have on the Mac. That was a piece of where we're going. But to come back to the Omni links, another problem that we wanted to solve is, I mentioned that I use outlines a lot in my day, But it's not just me. A lot of people at Omni use outlines a lot through their days, and we share these outlines. And so we want to be able to send somebody a link to an outline instead of saying, oh, if you go look in if you check out my staff folder in Git and go into documents, blah, 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 you'll find the latest plans from this meeting or whatever. Instead, I could just send somebody a link and have it be something that is shared and that they can open as easily as a link. That's one of the things I think that has been driving people away from native apps recently to cloud-based apps, is this ability to universally link to content and kind of share it and reference it that way. And so that was another problem that we set out to solve with OmniLinks, and I hope that we have done.
So far, it's been good. Yeah, no, I've already started using OmniLinks to much more cleanly manage the documents that apply to the tasks, and it's been. Again, I'm only a day into using it, but it has been great.
Yeah, and it's nice that you can share those links anywhere. You can link to them from your company wiki page or whatever we call it guidebook internally, but or I can put a link into OmniFocus and then just, okay, I want to pull up that reference content.
It's been very smooth, so congrats on that. It's been a great release.
Thank you.
Not a full release.
No, it's not done yet. I'm still working on it.
But congrats on where it is.
Thank you.
Here's the hot question. Are we going to see a liquid glass OmniWeb?
Oh, yes. For sure. What exactly that all looks like? Well, you can imagine what some of that would look like. Yeah.
I'm keen to see it.
Yeah.
Keen to see it. Okay, that is everything that I had on my list of questions, my exhaustive list of questions, except for one thing, which I always ask everyone. Is there a question that you wish somebody would ask you?
Oh, goodness. I have not thought of that question. Thank you for asking that question.
You never know.
Yeah, you never know. Oh, there probably is, and I probably don't know what it is. How's that? I'll think of it after the conversation ends. Oh, that was my opportunity. I had my golden opportunity.
That was the great question. This has been fantastic. Ken, thank you for sitting down and chatting with me. Congrats again on Omni Outliner 6, and it's just been great to connect.
Oh, thank you so much for your time and for reaching out. It's great to have this conversation with you.